collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
This week's programme is all about energy and the catalogue of failures and incompetence which is costing the taxpayer millions.
This discussion started in 2018. The tender was issued and awarded in 2019. At that time, had we gone for the Egyptian idea of hiring an FSRU, by the end of 2019 we would have had gas on the island at lower cost.
I'm joined on this week's programme by Charles Elinas. He's a senior associate with the Atlantic Council and an expert in the field of energy. He writes regularly for the Cyprus Mail, and he joins us now to talk about what seems to me, but I'm not an expert, a bit of a fiasco when it comes to the plans for us to put a liquefied natural gas plant at the Vasilikos facility. Now, this is something that was agreed upon, and I believe contracts were signed a couple of years ago, but we're not getting very far very fast. Charles, thanks for joining me. Can you give us first of all the background to this? Because this is all part of our energy plans, but they seem to be not really going to come to fruition anytime soon.
Well, the problem, this project obviously started with good intentions, even though I didn't fully agree with from the beginning on the idea of actually building our own facilities to import LNG. Just there's a little addition to this discussion. Egypt, in 2015, when they had problems with shortages of gas, a much bigger country, needing much more LNG than we do, didn't resort to building facilities of its own. It hired a couple of FSRUs, floating storage and regasification units, and imported LNG on the basis of hired facilities. A few years later, when it got its own gas, it got rid of them with little cost to it. In Cyprus, what we do for a very small amount of LNG, we're going to buy one of the biggest FSRUs in the world and build permanent facilities that will end up as a white elephant. Anyway, that's just a clarification about the background. Having agreed to proceed in this direction, the government decided to proceed in this direction. They had problems over the years on and off with trying to initiate tenders and not succeeding and so on. They were determined to make this happen. But unfortunately, the bidding and evaluation of tenders process was flawed. Not only flawed, but very suspicious, because they shortlisted 3 consortia. 2 of the consortia had ample experience in building LNG facilities. The third one, the Chinese consortium, had 0 experience. And yet they managed to disqualify the 2 experienced consortia before they went to the financial offers, and ended up with a single bidder and a single financial offer. In other words, no competition. They were just given the job. And the fact that the Chinese didn't have the experience is showing now, because they're unable to deliver the project properly. It's taking time, they're meeting problems and so on. The Auditor General highlighted all of these problems at that stage, long before they decided to award the project to the Chinese. I raised these issues in the press. They were all brushed aside. The Auditor General was definitely brushed aside. His comments were not taken into account, and the project was politically decided and awarded to this consortium that is meeting the problems now. So the problems are not surprising to me.
Okay, and it's also now going to cost a lot more than was originally contracted for. And then there's the problem, I believe, of the floating plant, which is supposed to be being prepared or should have been prepared by now. And reports that I've just read suggest that it's not going to be commissioned anytime soon.
That's correct. There will be delays. I mean, my own information is that the whole project won't be finished before 2024. It won't finish in July 2023 as the government is claiming it will. DEPA even said that they will speed it up and deliver it earlier. And the cost is estimated to be much higher. From experts in the field outside Cyprus, I hear numbers like 100 million euros extra cost. The government says, no, it's only going to be 25 billion, and they have made up their minds now to go and modify the contract to allow the Chinese to finish the project by July 2023 at an extra 25 million euros to the government. But there are many question marks about this, and this modification to the contract has to go through a number of approvals. One is this government committee that needs to review it and approve it, but I believe they will do it because it's made up of government employees and they're influenced by the government, so I believe they would give their approval. It will then go to the parliament, and I've got a feeling that it would be approved there as well, because most political parties believe naively that import of LNG on its own will bring the costs of electricity down, and we can talk about this, but it will not necessarily happen. And then the modifications need to be approved at European Commission level, because European Commission made this 101 million euros grant gave that money to the project, and also by the European Investment Bank and EBRD, because they loan the project money. Now, there are many who say that the Europeans, both the European Commission and the banks, were duped because Cyprus reported to them at the time of the bidding process that all the procedures were fully followed and it was awarded as a result of competitive bidding. They didn't say that it was awarded as a result of a political decision on a single bidder with no competition. So if that message passes to the Europeans, they might have a different view, but I'm not so sure as to what's going to happen.
Now, can we just talk about the options that are available? Because from what you've just said, it seems that possibly the funding that was originally granted could be withdrawn. Is that correct?
Well, if the European Commission investigates the project and discovers all these question marks with regards to the tendering process, the evaluation process, the monitoring process, the comments of the Auditor General, they might have second thoughts. But I suspect because the project is political, the European Commission might also politically turn a blind eye, so it might not necessarily go any very far in terms of cancelling it. They might continue.
If we did cancel it, I mean, is there still an option to cancel everything and take the route that Egypt took those several years ago?
Well, absolutely. If we were to cancel it, we would definitely incur costs because money has been spent so far that will not be recovered. Based on what I hear, that cost could be 70 to 80 million euros. That will be lost. It won't be recoverable. On the other hand, if you look at the potential losses, if we continue all the way with problems all the way and incurring much more costs to finish a project, 80 million loss now might be actually a blessing. But I don't believe the politicians will be willing to take that decision. I don't believe many will support that decision. But if we were to proceed in that direction, go the Egyptian way, we could actually have LNG imported on the island as early as end of this year, because we have an existing offer by Hoyle to bring an FSRU, install it themselves at their own cost at Basilico, with all the facilities, because facilities would be minimal, and be ready to import LNG by the end of the year. That will speed up, will bring forward the date by which gas will be available to EAC to convert to electricity production from oil to gas. But I don't believe that decision is going to be taken, despite the fact that I believe it might be the best option. So let's look at the other options. I mean, first of all, the government never carried out any techno-economic viability studies for this project. Some technical evaluation needs to be independent. Technical evaluation needs to be done now, urgently. So the government has expert advice to enable it to make decisions of the way forward, not to make just political decisions, to make political decisions, but based on knowing the facts from experts acting on this behalf. At the moment, that information doesn't exist. As a result, we have all this hearsay. I mean, I don't know if you have seen the press, but they are claiming that ludicrous numbers that this project, once completed, will bring 1.6 billion euros to Cyprus. And somebody threw that number without any substantiation, and it's like rabbits out of the hat. And yet, that number now seems to have gained acceptance by the politicians. They seized on it, and they go ahead. Anyway, this needs to be done. Apart from that, if they are going to negotiate in good faith with the contractor and agree to an extension of the contract to July 2023 at an extra cost of 25 million euros, then get ironclad guarantees that these changes will be the last ones, and anything else that might happen after that will be at the cost of the contractor. And if the schedule goes beyond July 2023, the contractor will incur damages. I mean, these must be obtained out of these negotiations, but I have little faith that it will.
It does just seem that it's a project that everybody grabbed onto and nobody put the right sort of planning into place. Tell me a bit about the use of the jetty that I've been reading about and why we want to have the facility at Vasiliko used for two things, if I understood correctly.
Well, first of all, having decided to buy this floating facility, the FSRU, a converted ship to regasify the LNG and produce gas out of it. Having decided to do that, they need a jetty. They need to moor the ship onto a jetty, and the jetty will have the facilities to accept the gas that comes, the imported gas, and take it to EAC. But they have also decided that they would like to use that LNG, the imported LNG, to offer bunkering facilities to ships passing by that may be using LNG as fuel. So these ships will anchor offshore, and small ships will carry LNG from this facility to the ships and supply them with their needs for LNG. Now, the possibility of that happening is not very high, and yet we are spending money converting the jetty to do that, and it's quite a lot of changes that are needed to accommodate this. And the third use they are proposing, and that's why we also have the FSRU, is that one day Cyprus might be exporting LNG from its own gas fields. As a result, we should have the ability to convert the jetty for exports and use the FSRU back as an LNG carrier to export LNG. That's another fanciful view because it will never happen. We missed the boat in terms of building LNG facilities, the liquefaction facilities in Cyprus and exporting LNG. That isn't going to happen in the future. So this jetty is being made to be so expensive as a result of potential uses in the future that probably will never happen.
Once again, it seems we've put the cart before the horse, have we?
Exactly. Instead of doing something simple that would have brought gas to the island a long time ago. I mean, this discussion started in 2018. The tender was issued and awarded in 2019. At that time, had we gone for the Egyptian idea of hiring an FSRU, by the end of 2019, we would have had gas on the island at lower cost. Now, the problem with this is that if this project goes to 2024, and I think it will, and it actually costs a lot more than the 25 million they're prepared to give the contractor, and I think it will. All of that money needs to be recovered and repaid. And even though the loans are over a 20-year period, it still needs to be repaid. So ESC will find itself buying gas that has to repay this additional cost, at a higher cost in other words. So whether ESC as a result of it is able to reduce the cost of electricity is questionable. And in addition to that, in the meanwhile, the electricity market is supposed to be liberalized. So those who build renewable power production units will be able to sell electricity at a lower cost, competing with ESC, making ESC's life difficult because ESC will be stuck with using this expensive gas. And there is another problem. Suppose that, as may be the target forced on us by the European Commission, we aim to produce 30 to 40% of our electricity from renewables by 2030. That means that the EAC will be able only to produce 60 or 70% of the remaining electricity out of gas. So these higher costs will have to be recovered on the basis of smaller amounts of gas. So the unit cost of the gas is going to be high. All of this, I don't think anybody really looked at the implications of all of these things. And I hear the politicians even now, the minister met Agel and met Digo, and out of both discussions, the message that came out is that the political parties are supporting the project because we need gas to bring the electricity costs down. They utter these words without having looked at whether they're real words or not. It's just slogans.
Can I ask you about the role of DEPA in all of this? Because we've had them on the front page with regard to natural gas. They are, I think, the natural gas public company in Cyprus. What's their relationship with the government and the EAC, the Electricity Authority of Cyprus, and, of course, their subsidiary ETIFA, which I think is the owner of this project we've been discussing?
Yes, ETIFA is building the project and will be the owner of the project, and DEPA will be responsible for importing and marketing gas on the island. They're both owned by the government. DEPA fully owned by the government. ETIFA is owned 70% by the government and 30% by EAC. So EAC has been forced to invest into this project as well. Now, DEPA has also been given a monopoly of gas marketing on the island for 10 years after the start of the operation of the facility. So they will be able to impose any price of gas they want, and nobody else on the island will be able to compete with that because nobody else will be allowed to consider other projects to import gas to the island. And by the way, if this commitment is solid, which I think it is, it would probably also stop any future use of our own gas from Aphrodite. For example, if Aphrodite were to be developed at some stage and it would have been possible to bring gas to the island, they won't do that because they will not want competition with this because of the commitment to repay the loans over the period. So it stifles the idea of developing Aphrodite and bringing cheap gas to the island. And now I heard some ludicrous ideas that Aphrodite might be developed. The gas will go all the way to Egypt by pipeline. It will be converted to LNG, and then we will buy back expensive LNG from Egypt. I mean, these are astonishing ideas, and yet they are brandished about seriously with the possibility that it may actually happen. So instead of getting the gas to the island from Aphrodite by pipeline at low cost, we will be importing our own gas from Egypt as LNG and then turn it back into gas. In the meanwhile, in Israel, where they have similar projects at similar conditions, the gas goes to Israel directly by pipeline, And the cost of gas to the Electricity Authority of Israel is $4 to $4.50 per million BTU. Something we could have achieved in Cyprus had we followed a different direction with our energy developments and policies.
Where did our energy developments and policies go wrong? Because I can think back to when they first discovered that we might have gas on our shoreline, and everybody was sort of clapping and shouting, "We're going to be rich, this is perfect, this is wonderful." Why and when did we take our eye off the ball and not think this through very carefully?
Well, we never actually had any long-term plans, energy plans. We always go from one year to the next, based mostly on political decisions and not necessarily based on techno-economic studies and real planning. I mean, last year I interviewed the head of RIC, the regulator, and he was lamenting the lack of a long-term energy plan in Cyprus. And this is where the problem lies. We don't have a long-term energy plan. We make decisions from time to time, but these are political decisions, not based, and therefore, as a result, they're not necessarily the right ones, and they're not necessarily consistent in the sense of aiming for something in the longer term. We just jump onto a bandwagon and do something, and then come back later, a year or two later, forget about what we did before, and start again.
And the taxpayer picks up the bill?
Yes, unfortunately, not only the taxpayer picks up the bill, but also the taxpayer pays and doesn't seem to complain. They don't get up in arms. I mean, you remember a few years ago in France when they increased the taxes on petrol as a result of environmental reasons, the yellow vests got up, rioted, and in the end the government had to backtrack. In Cyprus, we are docile. We just pay. We don't complain.
And it's obviously going to take a very long time before we find out what exactly is going to be the answer to all the things that we've been discussing, and indeed whether or not that facility at Vasiliko for liquefied natural gas ever comes to fruition and how it's going to work.
Well, it's true. I mean, in the end, I believe this facility to import LNG will become available at some stage at a much higher cost than they say, because I don't believe they will be able to contain the project, as I said before, to within 2023 at only 25 million extra. On the other hand, they tell me that because this Chinese company is owned by the Chinese government, there is an undertaking, a political undertaking by China to deliver it. I remain to be convinced that will be the case, that basically the company will absorb all of the additional costs just because of a political decision. It's a massive increase in costs. So problems will become clearer or become more evident as you go towards the end of the year, because there are still many, many problems associated with this project that haven't come to light. As you probably know, progress at Vasiliko is almost zero. They have just placed some containers on site to act as offices, but there is no work on the ground yet.
Well, they haven't even built a road, have they, to make it accessible?
Not even a road. And one other problem they're going to face is that many of the special equipment they need on the jetty takes a long time for them to be delivered. I mean, some of the specialist valves, from the moment that an order is placed, it takes something like 1.5 years before they can be delivered. And for the order to be placed, you first need to complete all the technical engineering studies and prepare the technical details for the valves before you can order them. And apparently the engineering studies are yet to be completed. So, other problems like, for example, the jetty needs to be installed safely, but the geotechnical investigations have shown challenges. So that means piling for the jetty may be a bit more onerous than they assume, which will produce its own problem and delays. As all these things we hear. But because there is no transparency about this project at all, zero transparency, there is a lot of hearsay that may or may not be fully correct, and yet the problems are happening, we see them, the delays are happening, and you can only surmise that this hearsay has a basis to it. It's not just words by people, there are serious problems.
And meanwhile, of course, the Energy Committee at Parliament is discussing and saying that we're going to have an opening up of the energy market and we won't pay so much for our electricity. It sounds from what we've just been talking about, Charles, that we'll be paying a lot more for our electricity for a very long time to come.
Rosie, how can that happen? I hear, and again, I don't have the full evidence, but I believe it's correct, that the new renewable projects being awarded over the last couple of years, they're being awarded on the basis of 18 cents per kilowatt hour. In other countries with similar conditions, these prices are down to 4 to 5 cents. 18 cents won't bring the electricity cost down. So even if you open up the market, if the renewable production is at that cost, it will not bring the electricity costs down. And with oil prices remaining very high and probably not coming down below $70 to $80 over the next 3 years in 2024, and the cost of buying allowances for emissions going up constantly, now this year we will exceed 100 euros per ton of carbon dioxide, the electricity costs will carry on going up and up until the switch to gas. But the switch to gas is not a panacea. It will not sort out the problems for the reasons I said. The gas will be more expensive because facilities will be more expensive. And there is something else that everybody forgets. Switching from oil to gas will bring the emissions down only by 25%. We will still have to buy and pay for emissions. And by that time, the cost of emissions will be much higher. So nobody has actually looked at the totality of all of these factors and come and say whether are we really going to get cheaper electricity even if we eventually build this project. Nobody has done that. They just say words not substantiated by any calculations or any studies or any viability studies or anything. It's just political. Somebody said something and they latch onto it and use it again and again, and everybody uses that to provide justification. And then, as you said before, if this justification in 3 years' time proves to be wrong, well, they shrug their shoulders and carry on, and people pay.
What a very bleak picture you have just painted for us, but I think it is important, the fact that we do question all of this chat that goes on in the press, in the Parliament, pretty well everywhere. Charles, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Just to add to this, Rosie, that's how I see my role. I understand the issues, I know the technicalities, economics, and I question these, and I do really hope that I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope everything works. But my role is to question these and make sure that there is pressure on the companies, on the politicians to move in the right direction. And I'm trying to maintain that pressure as far as I can. It's not that I don't want the gas to come. I want the gas to come, but I want it to come early and at a cost that can benefit the island, not based on slogans and political decisions alone.
And indeed, as a journalist, my job too is to question pretty well everything, which is why I invited you on the programme. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Charles, Senior Associate with the Atlantic Council and expert in the energy field. That is Charles Elinas. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.